Throughout the 2010s, the Rainbow community in Toronto, Canada, lived with a growing sense of fear, as members of their community began disappearing one after another. Many suspected that someone was deliberately targeting gay men, yet early warnings were largely dismissed by authorities as unrelated incidents or coincidences. Only in the year 2017, when police reopened the investigation into the disappearance of a well-known community member, did the disturbing truth begin to emerge. What investigators uncovered was so brutal that ordinary words seemed inadequate to describe it. The killer had preyed on at least 8 victims, restraining and torturing them, shaving their bodies, stealing personal belongings as trophies, and burying remains in different locations around a private garden. The case would eventually become one of the most horrifying serial murder investigations in Canadian history. How did investigators finally uncover the truth? Who was responsible for the crimes that terrorized an entire community for years? Before moving further into the story, remember to support the channel so you do not miss future cases based on real events. Now the story begins. Toronto, the largest city in Canada, is widely recognized as one of the world's most diverse financial and cultural centers. Located along the shores of Lake Ontario, the city is home to people from countless backgrounds, creating a vibrant environment filled with unique neighborhoods, international cuisine, and an active art scene. Landmarks such as the CN Tower and Nathan Phillips Square symbolize the city's modern identity. Toronto is also known for its openness and acceptance. One of the most visible expressions of that spirit is the Gay Village, centered around Church and Wellesley Streets. The area is decorated with rainbow flags and filled with bars, restaurants, shops, and community events celebrating LGBTQ+ culture. Each year, Pride Toronto draws enormous crowds from around the world. For many visitors and residents alike, the neighborhood represents freedom and equality. It stands as a symbol of diversity and human dignity within the city. But during the early years of the 2010s, a series of mysterious disappearances began to cast a shadow over the area. Several gay and bisexual men vanished without explanation. Rumors spread quietly through the community about a possible predator. Despite these fears, police statements repeatedly suggested that the cases were unrelated. Over time, trust between the LGBTQ+ community and law enforcement began to weaken. By the year 2017, tensions had grown so serious that Toronto police were temporarily excluded from participating in Pride events due to pressure from activist groups. During this same period, new discoveries began to confirm that the community's concerns had not been imaginary. Between the years 2010 and 2013, several missing person reports involved men such as Skandaraj Navaratnam and Majid Kaihan. Authorities launched an investigation known as Project Houston in an effort to determine what had happened. At that stage, no bodies had been found, and no clear crime scenes existed. Investigators explored every possible theory. One unusual lead even directed attention toward a dark web forum where a user claimed responsibility for killings in Toronto and boasted about cannibalistic fantasies. International cooperation was requested, and a suspect in Europe was monitored for months. Eventually, investigators concluded that the individual had fabricated the story online and had no connection to the missing men. That lead collapsed, and Project Houston was closed in the year 2014 without identifying a suspect. However, one important detail from the investigation received little attention at the time. While reviewing communication records, investigators noticed a mysterious email account appearing in the contact lists of multiple victims. The address, using the name SilverFox51, was traced to a man named Bruce MacArthur. In the year 2013, he was interviewed because he had known one of the missing men. He cooperated and denied any involvement. With no evidence linking him to the disappearances, he was released. This decision would later be viewed as a major missed opportunity. Meanwhile, the disappearances continued. Some cases were reported and others were not, but none were solved. Whether because the victims belonged to a vulnerable community or because evidence was limited, investigators made little progress. Then, in the month of June, in the year 2017, a turning point arrived. Shortly after a Pride-related event, a 49-year-old man, known for his friendly personality and active role in the community, suddenly disappeared. Friends became alarmed when he stopped answering messages and failed to return home to care for his cat. Concerned neighbors eventually entered his apartment and found it empty. On a calendar page dated the 26th of June, a single name had been written in uneven handwriting: Bruce. That simple detail immediately attracted attention. It suggested that the missing man may have planned to meet someone with that name. Although investigators still lacked certainty, this small clue would soon become critical to the case. Inspector Hank Idsinga and his team took over the case and quickly concluded that the disappearance was likely connected to a chain of earlier events. The vanishing of Andrew Kinsman, a well-known white man with many social connections, pushed authorities to establish a new investigative task force called Project Prism. In the month of August in the year 2017, Project Prism began examining evidence collected from Kinsman's apartment and started reviewing individuals named Bruce who had been in contact with him. At the same time, investigators analyzed security camera footage from the neighborhood. They identified a blurry image of a red van appearing near Kinsman's residence around the time he disappeared. The suspicious vehicle was traced to a middle-aged man working as a landscaper. That man was Bruce McArthur. His name immediately raised concern, not only because it matched the note found in Kinsman's apartment, but also because he was known to frequent the Church and Wellesley area and had a reputation for aggressive behavior. Investigators reviewed old records and discovered that McArthur had previously been arrested in the early 2000s for attacking another gay man with a metal bar. He had been convicted and received a suspended sentence and was temporarily banned from entering the gay village. This history made Bruce McArthur a primary suspect for Project Prism. One investigator also remembered that McArthur had been interviewed years earlier during Project Houston, a coincidence too significant to ignore. As suspicion intensified, police placed him under discreet surveillance. Investigators confirmed that McArthur owned a red Dodge Caravan matching the vehicle seen in the surveillance footage from the day Andrew Kinsman disappeared. By the time police attempted to locate the van, it had already been sold to a scrapyard during the autumn of the year 2017. Determined to continue, investigators located the vehicle and seized it for forensic examination. Inside the carpeting and cargo area, forensic specialists discovered traces of blood and semen." End quote. DNA testing confirmed that the material belonged to Andrew Kinsman. Additional samples also indicated the presence of another unidentified victim. Evidence that had once seemed lost suddenly became the strongest link connecting Bruce McArthur to multiple disappearances. Toward the end of the year 2017, after collecting evidence from surveillance footage, the calendar note, and the van, Project Prism prepared to request an arrest warrant. However, senior investigators decided on a more cautious approach. Instead of making an immediate arrest, they placed McArthur under constant surveillance in order to avoid alerting him. The goal was to gather further evidence and prevent any additional attacks. This decision proved critical. On the 18th day of January, in the year 2018, surveillance officers observed Bruce McArthur leading a young Middle Eastern man into his apartment in Thorncliffe Park. Fearing that the man might be in danger, officers moved in immediately. Inside the apartment, they discovered a scene that shocked even experienced investigators. A man was found completely naked, tied to a bed with restraints, his mouth covered and his eyes filled with terror. Bruce McArthur stood nearby, visibly excited. The victim was still alive and was rescued at once. McArthur was restrained and arrested at the scene. During a preliminary search of the cluttered and dimly lit apartment, investigators made a discovery that chilled everyone present. On McArthur's computer, they found photographs of numerous men, all believed to be dead, posed in disturbing ways. Some images showed victims dressed in fur coats. Others showed bodies, posed with cigars, placed mockingly in their mouths. The horrifying photographs left little doubt that investigators had captured a serial killer. The atmosphere inside the apartment felt suffocating. Christmas decorations, still hanging on the walls, created a disturbing contrast with the brutality of the crimes. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with damp air filled the rooms. In the bedroom, investigators found ropes, tape, handcuffs, and rubber gloves scattered among piles of belongings. Every detail revealed the methodical cruelty of the killer. Over the following months, investigators carefully processed the apartment as a crime scene. They collected approximately 1,800 separate pieces of evidence from the small two-bedroom residence. Among the items recovered were hard drives and USB devices containing hundreds of photographs documenting the victims. Evidence belonging to the victims was also discovered inside the apartment, including rings, necklaces, notebooks, and clothing. MacArthur kept these items as souvenirs after each attack. Investigators also found plastic bags containing hair and beards taken from several victims. During an initial interrogation at the scene, MacArthur falsely claimed that his interaction with the rescued man had been consensual. Detectives did not believe him. They remembered the disappearances that had occurred over many years and suspected that MacArthur was the missing link connecting the cases. On the 18th day of January, in the year 2018, MacArthur was formally arrested and initially charged with the murders of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Essen, the two most recent missing men from the year 2017. Investigators were convinced that the number of victims would prove to be far higher. With a primary suspect identified, police began reconstructing his background and social connections in order to determine how many people he had encountered and how many he might have harmed. Using identification records and information from the Gay Village community, investigators assembled a profile. Bruce MacArthur was born on the 8th day of October in the year 1951 in a rural town in the province of Ontario. He grew up in a strict Catholic household. His father was described as authoritarian and sometimes violent, and MacArthur's childhood was marked by fear and secrecy. From an early age, he realized he was attracted to men, but fear of his father forced him to hide his identity. At the age of 23, he married his high school girlfriend in order to satisfy family expectations. The couple had 2 children and lived a quiet suburban life for about 25 years. MacArthur worked as a traveling salesman for a men's clothing company. The job required frequent travel but provided little financial success. A major turning point occurred in the late 1990s when MacArthur was nearly 50 years old. He revealed to his wife that he was gay. The marriage ended, and he left his family home in Oshawa and moved to Toronto to begin a new life. In middle age, he became active in the LGBTQ community around Church and Wellesley. He joined dating platforms for gay men and used the nickname Silver Fox 51, referring to his gray hair and birth year. Many people in the community knew him as a friendly and approachable older man. During the Christmas season, he even worked as a Santa Claus performer in local shopping centers. Few suspected that the gentle man with a white beard, posing for photographs with children, concealed a violent and disturbing personality. Behind his friendly appearance was a man with extreme, violent fantasies. MacArthur frequently searched online for younger men, especially those of Asian or Middle Eastern background. On dating profiles, he openly described himself as a dominant partner seeking submissive men for unusual sexual role play. This was how he located victims. Those who agreed to visit his apartment often consented to being tied up or blindfolded as part of what they believed was consensual activity. Once they were restrained, they became completely vulnerable. Investigators noted that MacArthur had no officially diagnosed severe mental illness. Criminal profilers classified him as an organized offender. He did not act impulsively, but planned carefully, selected victims deliberately, and disposed of evidence in ways intended to avoid detection. Most victims appeared to be men of Asian or Middle Eastern origin who had visited the gay village and may have encountered MacArthur through dating applications. Based on photographs and early testimony, investigators believed that many victims had been dismembered and hidden in different locations. Andrew Kinsman and Selim Essen were almost certainly among them. Other missing individuals included Skandaraj Navaratnam, Abdul Basir Faizi, Majid Kaihan, Soroush Mahmoudi, and Dean Lisowick. All had previously been reported missing or suspected missing. Even so, the list did not fully match the number of victims suggested by the evidence. Photographs and digital files indicated that there might be as many as 8 victims. Forensic examination of MacArthur's computer revealed a special directory containing 9 subfolders. 8 folders were named after known victims, while the 9th folder contained images of an unidentified man. This man became known as the unknown victim. With no other leads, police appealed to the public. On the 12th day of July, in the year 2018, investigators released a photograph of the unidentified man to the media, hoping that someone would recognize him. Soon afterward, the family of a Sri Lankan refugee living in Toronto identified the man as Kirushna Kumarnan. They had never reported him missing because he had been living without legal status and avoided contact with authorities. It became clear that he had been killed in the year 2016 without anyone noticing his disappearance. Meanwhile, identification of remains continued through DNA analysis. Investigators searched multiple properties where MacArthur had worked as a landscaper. Witness statements led police to a residence owned by Don Smith and Karen Fraser on Mallory Crescent, where MacArthur had maintained large garden planters. Police dogs detected unusual scents coming from several large containers. Throughout the winter of the year 2018, images of the property covered with blue forensic tents and excavation equipment appeared across Canadian media. Beneath layers of soil and plant roots, investigators discovered carefully wrapped human remains. Partial remains of 7 victims were recovered from 12 large planters. The 8th victim was discovered buried near a small ravine behind the property. Each recovered fragment was subjected to detailed DNA testing and compared with samples provided by families of missing persons. The identities of the victims were gradually confirmed and matched the list of suspected missing persons. The victims included Skandaraj Navaratnam, 40 years old, a refugee from Sri Lanka who had fled civil war in search of a safer life in Canada. Navaratnam was known as friendly and sociable and was well liked within the community. He was last seen leaving a gay bar in Toronto in September of the year 2010. Abdul Basir Faizi, 44 years old, was an immigrant from Afghanistan who worked in printing and lived in the suburbs with his wife and 2 daughters. Few people knew he had a secret life at night in the gay village. In December of the year 2010, he told his family he was going to work and never returned. His car was later found abandoned near the neighborhood, and security cameras showed that he had visited a men's bathhouse shortly before disappearing. Majid Kaihan, 50 years old, was an Iranian-born man who had separated from his wife and often visited the Church and Wellesley district to live openly. He was reported missing by his son in October of the year 2012. His case was one of 3 investigated during Project Houston, but no concrete evidence was found at the time. Soroush Mahmoudi, 50 years old, was an immigrant from Iran who had married a woman from Sri Lanka and helped raise her child. He lived quietly, and few people knew about his same-sex relationships. In August of the year 2015, his wife reported that he had left for a night shift and never returned. He was the only victim who was not closely connected to the gay village community. Kirushna Kumarnan, 37 years old, was a Tamil refugee from Sri Lanka. He arrived in Canada in the year 2010, but was denied asylum and lived without legal status. He kept a low profile and avoided authorities because he feared deportation. Dean Lisowick, 43 years old, was homeless and spent much of his time in the gay village area. He had struggled with mental illness and addiction, but people who knew him described him as kind and generous, often sharing food and helping newcomers survive on the streets. Selim Esen, 44 years old, was an immigrant from Turkey and an amateur artist who loved literature and philosophy. He came to Canada hoping for a more open life. He was friendly and well-liked in the local LGBTQ community despite periods of unemployment and addiction. In April of the year 2017, he disappeared after leaving a temporary residence. Friends later told police that he had arranged to meet someone through a dating application before he vanished. Andrew Kinsman, 49 years old, was the final victim and the key to solving the case. A Canadian-born man, he had worked as a bartender and building manager and was also an active community volunteer. He was tall, outgoing, and known for helping others, which made him widely respected in church and Wellesley. When he disappeared on the 26th day of June in the year 2017, the alarm was raised immediately. The investigation into his disappearance ultimately exposed the earlier cases involving vulnerable members of the community. 8 individuals, 8 different lives. They might never have crossed paths if not for the actions of Bruce McArthur. On the 29th day of January, in the year 2019, McArthur appeared before the Ontario Superior Court in Toronto. He unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all 8 counts of first-degree murder. By pleading guilty, he avoided a lengthy trial and limited further public exposure of the disturbing details. During the hearing, prosecutor Michael Cantlin presented the full record of evidence. The courtroom fell silent as he described how McArthur had posed the victims' bodies in fur coats with cigars placed in their mouths before photographing them. He also described how police had discovered a man tied to a bed during the arrest, emphasizing that if officers had arrived later, the number of victims might have increased. Family members and friends of the 8 victims spoke before the court. Through tearful statements, they described the lives that had been lost sons, fathers, brothers, and friends who would never return. Many relatives later said they suffered depression, insomnia, and alcohol abuse after the shock. The weight of that grief filled the courtroom, leaving few able to hold back tears. In contrast to the emotion shown by the families, McArthur stood motionless in the defendant's box with a cold expression. When given the chance to speak, he lowered his head and quietly said that he had consulted his lawyer and did not wish to make any statement. There was no apology and no sign of remorse. His silence angered many of the victims' families. On the 8th day of February in the year 2019, the court sentenced Bruce McArthur to life imprisonment on 8 counts to be served concurrently, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. This meant he would not be eligible for parole until the year 2043, when he would be more than 90 years old. In practical terms, the sentence amounted to imprisonment for the rest of his life. Public reaction largely supported the verdict, with many believing the punishment was appropriate for one of the most cold-blooded killers in Toronto's history. Others argued that the sentence was still insufficient because Canadian law does not allow capital punishment, meaning even the worst offenders retain a theoretical chance of release if they live long enough. The victims' families acknowledged that no sentence, no matter how severe, could bring their loved ones back. The case left a deep impact on Canadian society, especially within LGBTQ communities and immigrant groups. Fear and anger spread widely. There was fear because a predator had been able to operate for years within a major city, and anger because warnings from the community had often been overlooked. The tragedy became a painful lesson for Toronto. No person should ever be ignored or forgotten, regardless of who they are. When someone disappears, it is not only a private matter for a family but a warning to the entire community. Candles lit in memory of the victims continue to burn as symbols of remembrance and justice, marking a hope that such crimes will never again remain hidden in the shadows. Do you think the 8 identified victims were all the people Bruce McArthur harmed? Or could there have been more who were never discovered? In your view, was the greatest failure in this case the brutality of McArthur himself, or the lack of attention given to the LGBTQ community by law enforcement? Share your thoughts in the comments. And remember to like and subscribe so you do not miss future videos.